This is the story of a modular board built around buildings that were 4,000 miles away, which is not ideal. This commission started like most of them do, with an email landing in my inbox. On the face of it, this was a pretty normal request, a modular Osgiliath board to replace a neoprene mat, so games felt a bit more immersive and they could be laid out in different ways. Nothing unusual there. The part that mattered wasn't that the buyer already owned the buildings. Nothing unusual there either. The part that mattered was that these buildings weren't just going to be placed on the board, they needed to feel like they belonged to it, like the terrain and the ruins had grown out of the same place, rather than being carefully positioned right before a game. Buildings were already built and painted, so their shape and footprint were fixed. Again, not really a problem, unless they're in South Carolina, 4,000 miles away. I've sent boards all over the world before, so the distance wasn't the issue. The issue was that I had to make a lot of decisions that I wouldn't really get a second go at. By that point, the build stopped being about coming up with ideas and started being about removing as much guesswork from the process as possible. And this is where the real story starts, and I introduce our hero. Cardboard. Very boring, very unglamorous. Millimetrically measured cardboard. I recreated every building at full scale in 2 dimensions using measurements and reference photos, so I could work out how the buildings and the board would actually relate to each other before anything became permanent. From there on, the process was fairly simple, just not quick. Every decision had to agree with those shapes. Once that relationship was locked in, I could start committing to the parts of the board that are difficult to change later. Things like the river tiles and the raised sections, and the overall structure everything else would respond to. After that, most of the work was about making the board behave as though the buildings had always been there. Rubble wasn't just added for decoration, it was there to explain missing walls and floors. The broken floors weren't random either. For collapsed floors, I worked out from reference photos, estimating the original footprint of the building and how the first floor might realistically have failed over time. Those lines were then translated onto the template so that damage followed the structure rather than fighting it. Once everything was textured and primed, the board reached the point where it was effectively committed. From there on, changes weren't impossible, just increasingly inconvenient. All of the final painting and detailing happened without knowing whether the buildings would actually sit the way I'd pictured. Even when the board was finished, there was still no real moment of certainty. On its own, it just looked like a finished board. I was pleased with it, but I had no idea how good it was yet. It wasn't until a few days later, when it arrived in the States and the buyer sent over photos of his buildings in place, that I knew it had worked out. Which was a relief, not because it was dramatic, but because it meant that the planning had done exactly what it was supposed to do. How well I'd done was confirmed later when I added these photos to a Facebook post on a Middle-earth strategy battle game group, in which somebody said the following. Yep, he actually thought that they were attached to the board, and that is as big a compliment as I could possibly wish for a project which had been, let's say, a little challenging. For me, this build really came down to understanding the constraints early, rather than trying to fix problems once everything was in place. Once that was clear, the rest of the process became much calmer and far more predictable. That way of working applies whether you're building a board for yourself or commissioning one from someone else. Most of the important decisions happen before anything permanent is done. If you're thinking about building a modular board of your own, the easiest first step is planning it properly before you start cutting or gluing anything. And I've put together a modular board planning guide that walks through that process, and that's available on Patreon if you want to take a look. I've also got the full build of this board over there as well, including all of the planning and decision making that didn't make it into this video. I really hope you've enjoyed this look behind the scenes at this crazy project that's turned out pretty well, I think, and I'll catch you for another video soon.